This is how to install a completely fresh copy of Windows 7 into a laptop using a flash USB drive. You'll probably run into this message, which is probably why you clicked on this video. You're at a dead end until you can get the Windows installer to talk to the flash drive. You'll be able to get through the first few screens in just fine, and as long as you can see the flash drive in the BIOS, historically you've been able to do the entire process. But a number of years have passed since the release of Windows 7, and we're up to USB 2.0 and 3.0, and most people are using either flash drives or DVD drives that are running through USB ports. We don't always have those installed internal DVD and CD drives anymore, and that ends us up in this situation here. So let's do it from start to finish. The reason I pointed this out first is because that's the reason most people will be having problems during this type of installation onto your later hardware, especially laptops. And so the first thing we need to do is have that driver available. It's actually very difficult to find. There's so many different laptops out there, etc. What you want to do is hopefully you already have Windows on that machine, and what you can do is extract the driver from that machine into a backup file, and then make that backup file available during the installation of Windows behind us here, and then that's how you solve the problem. And so I'm using this program called Double Driver. It's free. It was on CNET, so I'm not worried about viruses. And then what I just backed up everything. I selected all, and then I just backed up everything into individual files, folders rather. But the main thing we want to make sure we get is the USB mash storage device drivers, because that's where the flash drivers are, so that we can use our flash drive. So this is the one that I'm using here. I'm just using this simple SanDisk Micro 3.0, and it actually doesn't matter what kind of flash drive you're using. The brand doesn't matter. Actually, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 does not matter on the USB. What matters is the port that you're plugging it into, because the hardware port is what the Windows installer is looking for, regardless of what type of flash drive it is. And so the first thing I needed to do was get all those drivers available during the installation, and you'll see that in a few moments as I pointed out. But that's the first thing you really need to do before you start this process of trying to install from a flash drive, because there could be a case where it is proprietary to your particular laptop or your device, where the USB driver is a bit of a hassle. But from my experience, these USB drivers, the 2.0, the 3.0, are all very generic, and you'll probably be able to fish them off the net, or I may make this available for a download, because it's really just drivers. It's nothing to worry about as far as being downloaded from any source, because you'll end up getting them from your manufacturer if you're lucky, and chances are you won't be lucky in that event. And so the next thing I did was, I was a little bit lazy. You can make a flash drive. You need to put Windows 7 or your operating system of choice, Windows, onto the flash drive, and it needs to be a bootable flash drive. And so I was a bit lazy. You can do it through command prompt, and I've done it through command prompt before, but in this case I was just being a bit lazy, and I use this program called Win2Flash by NovaCorp. It's a legit thing. It's through CNET as well. I didn't worry about any viruses, and they have a paid version as well, but the free one worked out for me just fine. And so the purpose of this program was to create a bootable flash disk and then feed the ISO. You can go in and select the ISO, whatever you're using, Windows 7, Windows 8, and then put that into the flash drive and make that a completely bootable and installable flash disk, and that just made it more convenient for me using that program. And so then I had my flash disk accomplished. I was able to see it in the BIOS and start the Windows installation process, which we can see, this is what we all want to start seeing here. But after you see that screen, then when you're first thing you need to do is, of course, start booting into the alternate boot modes, and that'll be different for each laptop. In this case, I'm using a Lenovo ThinkPad 13, and basically all the Lenovo series at this point in time are using the F12 key, and you'll just need to find out what's appropriate for your laptop or whatever device you're using so that you can boot into the flash drive. In this case, I'm using the SanDisk Ultra 3.0, and of course that 3.0 is the one that's causing the problem. Well, it's not the disk, it's the interface. And so we select this during our boot up sequence so that we can go into that disk and start the Windows installation from that disk. And so let's find out. So I was just using F12 for this, going into that drive. And then when we finally get here, when we finally get access to that drive during the boot up sequence, we'll have Windows 7 as a selection to start installing that onto the primary hard drive. And so we select that, and then we start seeing Windows is copying files, and then starting Windows, and then when we get to this screen, selecting your language and next, and install now. And then boom, you just hit this nice brick wall of confusion for many people, including myself, until I figured it out. And so what we need to do, at this point in time, it's already seen the flash drive. You've seen it in the BIOS, and historically you're fine on the BIOS as long as it can see it. But as I mentioned, a lot of time has passed, and the original Windows installer has not changed. Even though we've received updates from Windows that can interact with the 2.0 and 3.0 flash drive ports, they are not in the original Windows installation, and that is the problem. And so since I showed you in the previous parts of this video how to get those drivers, we need to make sure that they're accessible at this point in time. So when we go to click browse, we can choose them from a source, whatever can be seen at this point in time. So right now, after I've clicked browse, I already had it installed on this laptop into the double driver folder so that I could go down and fish out the drivers when this time came. And so I just labeled that double driver, and I went down into the USB, and it's basically just generic Intel USB 3.0 drivers. And so and it was a little tricky. One time I used extensible host controller and that worked, and the next time on another laptop that was identical, it didn't work. And so then I went to just 3.0 root hub, and I just kept going into the 3.0s until finally one of them worked. And so once you get past there, you're all good. You'll see this whatever you're going to install there, and you'll click next, and this is what you want to see. Okay, when you'll know that the problem is solved when you see this, the license terms and everything. That's when it's ready to begin its primary installation, and you've solved that USB interaction problem. And so accept those terms, and then don't forget to do your advanced drive options if that's something you need to do. If you're not familiar with that, check it out before you possibly mess up your drive. This is just rehashing some of the stuff for the Lenovo ThinkPad 13. In some cases, I'm using Acronis a lot, and so the bottom line is Acronis would not cooperate with all the methods for the legacy and the what is it, the UEFI, whatever the new controller interface UEFI interface settings. And so you need to keep toying with those until you find the right one so Acronis can load. And then that's how I would re-image, I would take backup images of the drive so that I could save those for later and wipe the machine clean, and then I could also restore, of course, as well. And so then the UEFI usually works the best, but once again, it was just a crapshoot with Acronis on this one, and so that's how that went. And so basically, that's where it ends for you guys. The installation, you can proceed after you've started to see these screens, and you can see your partitioning. If you're going to do advanced partitioning, you're done. You're on your way. And that's where this video ends for you. But I'm going to keep going here for the people that use Acronis. And so when we can finally, in this Lenovo ThinkPad 13, The drivers were all the same. Just wanted to mention that you do need to toy a bit with the BIOS settings to get Acronis to work on the Lenovo ThinkPad 13 and possibly other IBM versions or other laptops until you can finally get through Acronis. And it's just a matter of toying with legacy versus UEFI versus only legacy until you finally get through the Acronis, and then you're done.